And we're back.
Yay!
Yay! Welcome everyone to Zoom Back Camera, the online film forum of the Browning Cinema. And at the top of the show, I have something I like to read in order to get it correctly, so I'm going to do that now. During these uncertain times that have moved us out of the physical Browning Cinema and into a virtual one, our thoughts are with those battling the virus, battling isolation, battling precarity, and battling the fear inherent to this moment. And alongside that, we want to extend our thanks and appreciation to first responders, medical professionals, grocers, public transit workers, childcare workers, and anyone else on the front lines. Zoom Back Camera is a tiny thing to offer, but we do hope these conversations about movies we love will buoy your day and continue the fellowship, education, and dialogue with which we like to bracket our films in the Browning Cinema. Also in the Browning Cinema, we like to say hello to one another. So feel free to say hi in the comments. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to kick them to us. There's a slight delay, but we'll do our best to incorporate it into our conversation. So now I get to introduce our guest curator, Eileen DiPofi. Hello, Eileen, how are you?
Hello, Ricky. I'm good. How are you?
I am good as well, thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do.
Yeah, so I am a senior at Notre Dame. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. I'm majoring in film, television, and theater. So I spend
Smart
a lot of
choice.
time in DPAC. It is a smart choice. And I work up in the FTT office, and I've done a lot of the FTT shows. So yeah, I pretty much live in DPAC when I'm at Notre Dame.
And do you have a first memory for seeing Taxi Driver?
I do. So it actually wasn't even like that long ago. It was the summer after my sophomore year, and I was living in Traverse City for the summer, doing an internship there, and I would like ride my bike to the library nearby and like just like rented like so many movies that summer, and that was one of the movies that I rented, and it really stuck with me. I think while I had the DVD, like that time I watched it like 3 times. And yeah.
And Paul Schrader, who wrote the screenplay, has talked about this film being about the pathology of isolation. So whatever made you choose it nowadays?
I know, yeah. Strange time to choose it for sure.
Relevant though, relevant time, yeah.
Yes.
And beyond that, you've done a lot of work and research on method acting, relevant here as well. What interested you in that, and what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, so my senior thesis, I don't have like a catchy title yet, so we'll get back to you. But it's dealing with method acting and authenticity in America, basically is like the driving theme. So what I'm doing is tracking the method, particularly in film in Hollywood, and I guess like analyzing how the method has been aligned with dominant notions of authenticity in American culture and like what it means to be authentic, and how it has both like challenged some of those discourses and also like through that discourse promoted certain actors and like a normative identity type in particular. Like pretty much it's all white men that we talk about when we talk about the method, which is why then a lot of my case studies were focused on people of color and women who were method actors. But I guess as far as what got me interested in it, I knew I wanted to do a senior thesis / had to because I'm in the honors program, but I really did want to.
Good motivation.
Yeah, it was a little bit. But I guess like what made me choose that topic in particular, I was taking a class with Pam Wojcik, who's my advisor, who has been so helpful through this. So shout out to her. But I was in her class called Sinatra, and we just happened to read like a chapter from one of the major books on like method acting in film. And I had always like heard the term but didn't really know what it meant, and it just, yeah, I've done a lot of acting myself too, so like performance in particular is something that interests me, and like kind of getting to integrate that with my like passion for film studies and like film criticism was like the best of both worlds.
And how have you gone about your research? Are you jumping into archives? Are you doing a lot of like film text analysis? How are you going about it?
Let's see. It's been a lot of so I did structure like each chapter is a different case study. So I have one on like Shelley Winters and Sidney Poitier and De Niro, which is fitting. And I mean, for each of those, I would watch most of their like a lot of their films, especially like their major ones, and then kind of read the scholarship around it as well. But I also did I got funding through Notre Dame to go to an archive in New York. At the New York Public Library, which had a lot of like primary source documents from the actor's studio, which is like where the method originated. So I was also able to do that for the first time, like go to an archive and I don't know, research there. So that was really cool as well.
Yeah. Do you like being a library rat?
I do. I'm
Oh, that's
such a
good.
library rat. And so that was just a dream, except for the only negative part was I enjoy being a library rat when I can have like coffee, but you can't have coffee near the documents. So that was disappointing. But other than that,
They need
10 out of 10.
they need like the Crystal Pepsi equivalent for coffee.
They do. Yeah. And I have heard of caffeine pills, but I enjoy the taste.
The taste, and you know, I think this movie might might steer some people away from pill popping. So
Yes. Although Travis does drink a lot of coffee, so I don't know.
gotcha. Well, let's go ahead and get into it, as this is quite the movie to start to unpack. And we get a really interesting credit sequence with Travis Bickle, our main character, Robert De Niro. I'll normally be talking about like Travis as a character, Robert De Niro, like when he's talking acting, but I might flow in and out of that. What'd you take up from that kind of hazy, distorted view of New York City that we get right off the bat?
Yeah, I love those opening shots because I think it really establishes a lot of what Scorsese will be doing throughout the film in terms of like we get these hazy shots of the city and then we immediately cut to just like Travis's eyes in the mirror. So like right off the bat, we're seeing New York City as like distorted through Travis's vision, and just that linking there with the editing makes that like very clear. So I just love that opening.
Yeah, yeah. And it's yeah, and you're even getting like a distorted shot of Travis, right? Like we don't,
Yeah.
nothing's direct. Like there's always intermediaries
Yeah,
involved.
that's very
Yeah.
true.
And then we see Travis get his first or not first job. We get his job at the taxi shop, and very quickly we pick up he's going to be exemplifying a lot of white masculinity tropes. How does, as someone who's interested in the method and how De Niro plays with it, how does he inhabit that? Does he step away from it? Like what stood out for you, either initially, you know, or as he's setting up the character?
Yeah. I guess like first thoughts, uh he's very, I don't know, like he walks in and he's just like so lethargic and you can just like feel just how beaten down he is, and like just his eyes seem like slightly like closed, and like he's just like so beaten down, and just his energy is so different than like if you look just like 2 or 3 years back at like Mean Streets, where he's just like jumping out of his skin to like this like totally just like subdued, and like it makes you think on the one hand like there's some of that energy brewing beneath, just like thinking in the context of like the De Niro figure. But I think like what makes De Niro such like an interesting method actor was his ability to like transform from role to role, and I think like just right off the bat this is like the first shot we're getting of him in this role, and he's just so different from just even any of the other roles we've seen him in so far. So I think it just like really establishes that right off the bat that like this is going to be a character we haven't seen before, and like it just primes us for something unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's the whole like stories too about him coming off of an Oscar win and like having a persona, but people still not recognizing him. So it's early enough that he has
Yeah.
malleability in his celebritydom or stardom that he can restart in a way. It's tough to do in, like, let's say, The Irishman, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And like it is really interesting too, just like a lot of the conversations around him and like the press and everything, like every single one is emphasizing like, oh, he doesn't act, he becomes. And like that's just like they are saying that so frequently, which like doesn't seem out of the norm for like a method actor today. Like when we think of method actors, like I don't know, like Daniel Day-Lewis or something, that tends to be what we think of. But like
Mhm.
in comparison to Brando and like James Dean, who they seem to be talked about in a way that was like they could foreground their self. This was just like such a radical shift in like that interpretation. So that's why I think like De Niro's so interesting in that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Um, and with taxi stands and shots generally, are you just fully like Uber generation? Like, have
Mm.
you like how like have I'm gonna ask this here. Have you hailed a cab? Like,
So the last time I took a cab was pretty recently when I was in New York for my thesis. I took a cab from the airport to the hotel, and it was quite an experience. It was this the cab driver was awesome. Actually, I saved his business card because he gave me his business card. I'm going to show it to you. So,
oh,
well, so also just like weird thing, I like love scrapbooking, which is like so just like old lady-ish. But so there's his little card. Billy Kimming was his
hey,
name. Shout out Billy.
free
Oh, we didn't
press.
blur the number. Oops. Although he would probably want it because basically he was like trying to push me these protein drinks that he'd invented, and like he's like really trying to sell these so hard, and like he was like showing me his Amazon account, and like he didn't even look at the road once. He was constantly like showing me pictures of like celebrities who I had never heard of, who he had like met. And so yeah, Billy was crazy. So it was a time. A little different than Travis, but interesting guy.
um, and then into uh, the first moments of narration we get, and this is through the device of the journal that we go back to at various points, which also gives us a timeline. So we know, I think it's May 10th or so. And how does the sound of the narration, his voice, which is its own distinct form of acting, work for you? Does it grow the character differently? Does it double down on what he's trying to do? Any thoughts on that in the movie?
Yeah, I think the like voiceover just in general is so interesting because like so much of the film is Travis like trying to project like a certain selfhood and like trying to like recreate images of like masculinity or something that like he's seen in pop culture. So it's really interesting. Like these voiceovers are probably like the most like raw form of Travis, I guess, that we get. And so just like it's so De Niro just kind of like drones in like this like nasal voice and like I don't know, it's really interesting because it does seem different than like the very I don't know, like just like reticent and not very verbose Travis we see in real life versus just like his ramblings. And I think that clues us in early on that like there's something beneath the surface of this guy that we're just not seeing yet.
Right. Yeah. At this point, the unreliable narrator isn't necessarily in place. Um,
Yeah.
it takes certainly by the point we're sending Hallmark cards, we have an idea. um, and we get the social zones that Travis is inhabiting, the very transient space in the back of a taxi, the seedy spaces in adult movie houses, just places where you don't connect with people. Um, Anything that, like, I guess as a moment to start talking about like isolation in these spaces or how De Niro does or doesn't connect. Um, Anything for you on that front, just where he's going and how he's failing, how he shows that?
Yeah. That's tough. I mean, one thing I'm
That's,
thinking of.
I'm tossing exam questions all the time. Sorry.
um, I mean, I think like why like De Niro does such a good job with it is like we never suspect that Travis like knows how inept he is, I guess. Like when he's conversing with the woman at like the porno theater, like he seems like genuinely shocked that she would ever like rebuff him, and like he's just so invested in the character that I think he does a good job at like translating just that total barrier between like him and every other person that he just like cannot bridge.
Hmm. And is it Troy that she calls out Tony, a name like that? Like
Yeah.
how they make it abrupt. So, the film is helping his character too, and
Yeah.
showing just like, oh, I'm surprised that she yells it out that way.
No, and like so much of Travis's character as Agent 2 is coming from like the POV shots that we're getting throughout the film, and like that's like the film really does a good job. Like De Niro can just kind of like for like scenes on end just sort of like sit there with a blank face, and like we're getting so much information about his character from the outside as well.
Hmm. Yeah, the film makes it easy on him, right? Um, he orders Chuckles, doesn't get him. A Clark bar, Goobers, popcorn, RC. What's your one go-to
Mm.
movie snack?
It's so easy. So it's Werther's.
Oh
If
my
you've ever
God,
had the
Werther's
caramel delight that
frat
is
cookie.
Werther's. I have one friend in particular who we see a lot of movies together, and she always makes fun of me because like literally like 5 minutes into the movie, I like pull out one Werther's for me and like one for her, and I'm like, I brought you a Werther's. So that's definitely my go-to snack. What about you?
Um, well, actually, when I just rewatched this and he orders that Chuckles, I was like, I would give my left hand for a Chuckles. I haven't thought about those in a long time.
I don't know what a Chuckles is.
They're like, do you know the Sunkist discs where they are like fruit gummies that are covered in sugar?
I
Like
think so.
it's just like a straight like sugar crack
That
kind
sounds
of.
good.
Yeah. But well, and along those lines, a Sour Patch Kid. I'll always mess
Okay.
with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a solid go-to. We then we head to Palatine. I could never get it right because I run it back in my mind. But to his headquarters, we meet Betsy and Tom. And well, just first off, like Palatine, Tyne or Teen? Can you help me out?
Palantine, I believe.
Tyne.
Yeah.
That's a tough schwa
Mhm.
sound or whatever for me. Okay, Palatine. How do you read his politics or the lack of politics? Like, how do you think of that campaign?
Yeah, I'm always conflicted on it because on the one hand, like especially earlier, and maybe like this is the point, but like earlier on in the film, I do feel like I've got leaned towards like viewing him as a more like kind of like grassroots, like progressive candidate. Like he's talking about like his welfare platform is like the big thing, and they're like talking about mandatory welfare for all, and like it sounds like he's got like concrete issues. But then I do think like throughout the film it becomes more and more like he's just like a typical politician who's like willing to, I don't know, sort of adjust that as needed. Like I'm sure we'll talk about it, but like the scene in the cab with Travis, as well as like one of the later scenes we see of his speech, where it's like we literally don't even see his face; it's just like his hands waving, and that makes me think we're supposed to not think highly of him. But I don't know, like he's very much about like the people, so like kind of like a very like populisty type leader. I don't know. I'm always conflicted on how to read him.
Yeah, it's for me, I just read it as kind of a cipher and not that much into it. But it's also one of those, I'm sure people have written on this, like what it meant in the moment. But I don't happen to have that that knowledge, and so I'm just like, oh, he's a politician,
Yeah.
like lowercase p politician. Um, we head to the diner where, I mean, conversely, we can talk about Goodwin, who is off screen except for posters. Do you read, I mean, it has to read differently now in the 2020 compared to 1976, but the return to greatness, good for
Yeah,
posters.
I know. Now it's like, obviously you can't think of that except for in light of like a current politician's slogan. But I think it's just that, I mean, and this idea still stands, but the idea of like returning maybe to this time when I'm thinking like white masculinity in particular was like not under attack, and like just this feeling of disenfranchisement, and like the fact that that politician is like juxtaposed with Palantine, and eventually Travis will like shift his alignment. We don't know, like obviously he's not like political about it, but I mean the fact that like if that's Palantine, like this is the other option, and like that option is about like reclaiming some lost greatness, I think is really interesting, and definitely that parallel I think like deepens the whole Palantine thing immensely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We also get to meet the relationships he has with his coworkers. Any takeaways from how we're setting up those relationships?
Yeah, that scene is really interesting. I mean, for a number of reasons. I mean, just I think this is, I mean, we haven't seen many scenes of him like interacting socially with anyone at this point, but like this just makes it very clear how unable he is to do that well, and just like we feel like his mind wandering just with the shots on like the glass with the, is it like aspirin that he's throwing in there?
Alka-Seltzer, yeah.
Alka-Seltzer.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and like we just get these like wandering shots that make it clear like he just like cannot focus in that social situation, like he's just like not communicating. But I think also this is one of the first scenes that like race becomes really important, because we get the weird shot of there's like two black men like further in the cafeteria who are like seated, they're like dressed very nicely. I think the one guy's like wearing a hat, but they like, in Travis's perception, they're just like staring him down, and there's like a long shot of them just like staring at him. So I think this is also the first time when we see like this racial paranoia on Travis's part. So the scene for me is like very interesting in that reason, because it becomes very clear like we are seeing this filtered through Travis's eyes, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna get a lot of like in-group, out-group formation of Travis.
Yeah.
And from an isolated position where it's just very hard to form an in-group, and it's very easy to form an out-group. And
Yeah.
we'll see here that it's going to continue to spiral up and out. He gets his very nice red velvet coat, and heads on down to campaign headquarters and asks out Betsy. How do you feel about Betsy, the character, her interactions with Travis, or generally how like Sybil Shepherd's performance in the role?
Yeah, I mean, like, just the diner scene. I love the diner scene. Like, it's so funny to me. I always laugh. But just the contrast between the two, like, in every single regard, but like in acting performance as well, because I mean, like, De Niro's got a lot of the method markers from like the 50s, where it's like some stuttering and like mumbling and like long pauses and things like that that just like mark his performance, whereas hers, it just seems like crisper and cleaner, and I think it just marks them as being from two very different worlds. And we see that contrast in the diner scene, where it's literally the only thing to pay attention to is like the two of them going back and forth. So I think that's pretty interesting. I just love the whole organized miscommunication. I mean, on the one hand, it's just like really funny to me. And then her deadpan response. Oh shoot, what does she say? Oh, like those signs in offices that say think. I just find that so funny. Yeah.
He also does order an apple pie with either American or cheddar cheese. Do they mess with that in Toledo, Ohio?
So I don't. I know my mom says my grandma used to always do that though. So I don't know.
Uh, In Iowa, it was definitely like a farmer choice, like
Yeah.
that, and like salting cantaloupe were like things that overlapped with one another.
Salting, like putting salt on
Yeah, like you can either sugar your jam
it.
sandwich, like Iris, or you can salt cantaloupe, like my grandma.
Jeez. Wow.
Uh, but I asked for it for like a birthday party, like my work, like the work birthday party, and I got a look like I had 19 heads. People were not into it. So not the most successful first date.
No.
Um, but then we get a piece of Betsy's world into Travis's world um, in when Palatine uh, takes or hails and gets into Travis's cab. Um, are you a fan of the scene?
I like it. I
Oh,
do.
yeah, I like it too. What'd you pull from it? What's cool in that one for you?
One of the things I always really like is when he's like trying to figure out like Travis's name, he's like, "Thank you," and then we get the two like quick shots of like Travis's ID, and then he's like Travis, and I just like that in terms of just like him being very sharp as like a politician and quickly being able to like read this guy and ID him, literally, but then like also I think on another level too, we see he's like really adept at taking what Travis gives him and like weaving it into his political narrative. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know. You like the scene. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's you see someone who is very strong at reading people, emoting, connecting with them, even if superficially, and someone who lacks that skill set,
Yeah.
uh, who takes such pleasure from it because they're unable to read what's happening. So, in some ways, he's like the perfect mark, right? Like for a politician,
Yeah.
the need of feeling like they care about him, they know him, and the fact that it gives them such pleasure is really heartbreaking.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
But it does have the, I mean, there are flourishes in this movie that are very as you say, like stuffed with film language, the editing, the shots pull from things that were happening about a decade before. And that's a moment where it's, Scorsese's willing or very much wanting to put his fingerprints on the scene. And
Yeah.
I like that playfulness. We then get some of the indignities. Iris tries to get into the car, taken away by Sport. Matthew gets $20 for the trouble. Is it 20?
I don't actually know.
20,
I'm not sure.
She gets some cash.
Something
Free
good.
cash.
Yeah.
Yeah, and pockets it. Does not report it. The indignity of getting egged, the indignity of going back to work, and there's all these dump trucks around, and so things are low. And he then gets an uptick with a second date with Betsy. Not well planned, this date.
No. He didn't know his audience there.
I don't think he did. We'll start with this. Like, what's the lamest place you've been taken on a date?
Yeah, I mean nothing that like bad that like as maybe someone taking me to like a porno theater, I probably wouldn't be super into that. But I mean probably like a high school soccer game.
Ooh.
That's just like I'm not into sports and like particularly not when high schools are playing them. So that yeah, that's gotta be mine.
That's a lousy date.
Yeah.
It's not as obviously odious
Yeah.
as adult theater, but
Yeah, not quite that bad.
know your audience.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that's the thing here. We have someone unable to read audiences. Um, we then get the the apology phone call to Betsy, the flowers, him trying to make up for his past mistakes, which he realizes. And we get like huge body checks on like his masculinity, and the fragility of it starts to show. Whether going to headquarters to find Betsy, the phone calls, the flowers, the inappropriate distancing. How did that? What did you in those scenes? Were there anything that really worked for you, or you remember?
Yeah. I mean, I think the flowers are really interesting and a very strong visual too, because then we get to watch them like wilt throughout the scene and then him eventually just like burn them. So I think that's a very nice visual metaphor right there. But I think it just speaks to how he's very much like he doesn't have the personal experience and he's just sort of modeling his behavior off like the images he's received from like the media or just like notions of like what masculinity and like what romance should look like. And I feel like him saying like, oh, I need to send her flowers is like very much just like him trying to enact what he's seen work in like movies or something like that. So I think that's really interesting. And then the fact that at the end he just totally burns that. But then I think also oh, what was I gonna say? Never mind, it left me.
No, it's fine. And this is the point where even saying, you know, the flowers, which are a rejection of him and what he stands for, made manifest, making him sicker. His headaches are getting worse. Like there's the cracks are showing from the direct results of people saying like you don't have the power that you're expecting to have.
No, that's what, the stomach, like I think I have like cancer, stomach cancer, just like that whole thing is really interesting. Because it reminds me a lot of like in some of my classes we've talked about like the 50s and like kind of this hegemonic model of like masculinity where the man has to be the breadwinner and like he's wearing the gray flannel suit and going to work 9 to 5. But like a lot of those films would depict like ailments like that, like kind of like heart attacks or like just like eating away, I guess, at like the model man. So like I think just grabbing that idea of like him trying to embody this ideal of masculinity is like literally like eating him away from the inside is really interesting.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and well, also it's a way of outsourcing being eaten from the inside. Like it's like, oh, it's cancer, and it's not the fact I put brandy on my cereal.
Right.
You know? Like it's like someone else's, like some like a unseen force is what's in play, as opposed to the direct result of my actions.
Yeah, no, that's so true.
And blame outsourcing. One of the I don't know what to say. It's a crucial scene. I think it really is a fulcrum scene in a lot of ways. But it's a jarring scene. I guess that's the word I'm going to go with. Is when Travis has a client who wants him to put the meter down and look out the window and gives a monologue about killing his wife. The acting, the social statements, what'd you pull from that?
Yeah, so this scene used to kind of bug me, I think, in particular because of Scorsese's acting. And especially like when you're up against like you're in a scene with someone like De Niro and like you're not really an actor, like it's gonna stand out as like sort of unnatural and like a bit like caricature-y. But then the more I think about it, like I think that actually kind of works for me. Like the idea that he's almost like a caricature of just this extreme, like aggressive white masculinity where like the idea of his wife having an affair is going to drive him to murder. And like the fact that, I mean, he even uses the N-word, like the fact that she's having an affair with a black man is like so threatening to like his masculinity and like his sexuality. So it almost works for me, the fact that Scorsese is a bit of a caricature in it, because this is sort of like this image then that I think in a lot of ways Travis will try to model himself after. So I think I'm okay with it the more I think about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that's inherent to this movie is, you know, white straight guys getting to define and critique white masculinity.
Yeah.
And it's a big issue, and and so when you have the director literally inhabiting like the voice of, in some ways I can see it as, oh, this is someone planting a lot of ideas into Travis's mind, and like that meta moment, and whether or not that's a moment to be playful, like I get it, it's one of those like the like public defender lawyer like vibe of me is like, well, today I will give the case why this is okay, or or the other, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just like an issue. Yeah, like you said, like inherent to this movie on the whole, the fact that it is Scorsese, straight white man critiquing white masculinity. Yeah, I do. I know what you mean. I kind of like flip back and forth in terms of like how I feel about that.
Yeah, and just as like a record, like, oh, this is 76, and obviously we're getting many other voices adding to discussions of masculinity behind and in front of the camera today, but like as a moment in time to look back, like, oh, this is what they were saying about it and how they were saying about it, and still strip mining it for the interesting things.
Definitely.
But it's the talk of the 45 Magnum, and it's actually a scene I wrote here. I didn't have time to look up the script. I was like, oh, I should read actually what's being said, because so much of it is like, woo. It'd be nice to check the script on it.
Yeah, right.
So after that, he rejoins his coworkers, and the coffee klatch in some ways has changed. The vibe, particularly after this moment. Thoughts on either kind of Wizard's libertarian position of do what you want, but not in my backyard or my back seat.
Yeah, I know.
Or how like he tries to connect with Travis, or Travis tries to connect with him.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that scene. There's like a lot going on, because they're, like you said, they're having that whole kind of conversation before Travis goes in, where they're like, oh, like they're so ahead out in California, and talking about like it's strange because they don't seem, I mean, they definitely seem homophobic, but at the same time they're like not full on against it. So that I don't know, that's a lot of interesting stuff happening right there. But I think then the conversation that happens with Travis outside is like super interesting, because we see for the first time, like I feel like Travis actually trying to articulate some of the things that have been brewing inside him, and he's just completely unable to. And it's like, I mean, he's talking like a white man to a white man, so like you'd think maybe they could like kind of feel the same things that obviously like Travis is going through, but like Wizard just takes like a much more like laissez-faire kind of stance about the whole thing, like oh, just do your work, like get laid, which I also find very interesting, that get laid is like his solution. Just the idea of like exercising his sexuality will like reinvigorate him, I think is an interesting little thing there. But yeah, that conversation is like, it's kind of heartbreaking, because Travis is like trying, and like he's trying to get help, and no one's understanding him.
And his moments of trying to emote are, you mentioned like the gray flannel suit, get sieved back through this "you are your job" mantra, and like, which is a way of saying like you are not your emotions, like the workplace is free of emotion. And you don't have to look beyond that. Just go for their primal urges outside of it and stay the course, which we see how that works out for folks.
Yeah, right.
The we have Palatine. His presence is starting to like rev up as revving up as Travis is unwinding and getting more delusional. And well, first of all, I like the scene where Travis drives by headquarters and sees the empty desk of Betsy, and then goes and seeks out Iris. And I like it most because in that scene, I can realize that the desk that I'm sitting at right now is literally the same make and model as Betsy's.
No way.
Yeah, I felt that's my connection to Hollywood is I thrifted Betsy's dress somehow. Yeah, the lightest of wows. But then he tries to connect with Iris. It doesn't quite happen. But someone with whom he does connect is Easy Andy, right? This is the gun dealer. And I imagine gun buying scenes are again different in 2020 and compared to 1976. But I'm sure there are consistencies as well. Would you think of it either as what it's always said, or they probably didn't think about it in this way, or what about the scene interests you?
Yeah, I really like it because I mean this is right after he's like very recently been rejected by Betsy, and he's sort of like he had, like we talked about, like that very unsuccessful conversation with Wizard. So he's very like, he talks about like he wants to go out and do something, and then he also talks about how he needs to, like, I forget how he phrases it, like he needs a change or something, and then that change he finds through like he starts like working out vigorously, and then he also like goes out and buys a gun. And I think it's really interesting that like this one model of masculinity, maybe like the romantic hero, didn't really work out for him, so he's going to sort of adopt a new model that I'm going to assume he's also seen on TV, where it's like very like uber masculine, like he's bulking up, he's buying a gun, and just like this very aggressive model of masculinity, in the hopes that like maybe that will make his voice heard a little bit more. So I think it is also kind of like relevant. I mean, it is relevant today, but I mean, just thinking about the idea that for someone who like feels disenfranchised or disconnected from society in whatever way, that maybe through like the media or just different cultural narratives, like they're told that they can express their masculinity like most potently through like gun ownership and through violence, I think still like makes this film like really resonant today.
Yeah, and what's interesting when you hear about gun culture, I mean there is again, being from like rural Iowa, there is a world around guns and discussions and like a culture in which you enter, and that is completely the opposite here, right? There's no it is as like back alley as it could be. And even when he's going to shooting ranges, he's not interacting with people. This is like the cultural connection that is potentially there that I think leads a lot of people to guns is not fulfilled for him. So
and like when in the hotel, like when he like tries the gun for the first time, we see him like take it out the window and like aim it at like a group of like kids or moms or something. So obviously he's not using these guns to connect socially, like actually quite the opposite, which is
or like it shows like, oh, I want to be with these people. But
that's true, and this is like the way he sees to do that.
And that's that is the conduit for the connection, or lack thereof. So you're talking about his workout scene, and it's really funny, again, these moments of isolation that we're in now. And when you have like the workout montage, and you read all these articles about people who are like taking this moment to like very much like own their body physically and spending hours, made me feel good that I'm not doing 50 pull-ups or whatever and putting my hand over an open flame.
Yeah.
Which I don't, did you, like, when you see that, like, open flame thing, does it speak to it? I mean, like, other than, like, whoa, but, like, anything for you? I'm asking because that's other than, like, I can think of kids who would do it as, like, a proof that they're strong, but
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, like, on the one hand, maybe it's just, like, the overt, like, masochism demanded of, like, this model of masculinity, where you have to literally be, like, harming yourself in order to prove that you're masculine, so I guess that's one thing. Although, it did make me think of, when I was, like, in grade school, my friends and I would always have, like, hot water, like, competitions, we call them, or something, and we would just, like, crank the faucets in the school bathrooms on like high and like see who could like leave their finger in there the longest, and like I am not kidding you, I always won. So I can relate to Travis a little bit because it hurt.
Do you have like fingerprints left anymore? Like,
I don't know, I haven't been tested.
just called it off.
I might have.
That's well, congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
And here I mean, as the character is changing, I mean, do you see the acting changing? Do you see the character changing? Like how do you, like, does the method, I mean, does the method change, or is it always the same method regardless? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean.
Okay.
And I don't know, like that's the thing I've grappled with a lot with this thesis is like there is no clear like what is the method, and I think like my thesis has ended up being a lot more about like how people talk about the method and like how that changes, because like it's different for every person, like every person is interpreting it differently, but I do think that like De Niro did map, I think, a new sort of discourse around the method, wherein, as I was talking about before, like it becomes less of he's presenting himself on screen versus like he's able to radically like alter himself on screen, and I think that this transformation sort of embeds that narratively. Like the Travis we see at the end of the film is just so radically different from like the one we saw at the beginning, or like the one we see with Betsy, and so I think like his ability to sort of like shapeshift
Mhm.
is very much inherent to like the De Niro model of the method.
Got it. Which I mean, because in what, 4 years, he's going to get really famous for it with Raging Bull.
Yeah.
Because that's like one of the first Hollywood stories you're fed, for lack of a better word. Like, oh, he ate all this food and gained weight, and
Yeah.
yeah, in fact, that's like when I think of the method, I'm like, oh, someone like ate a lot of French food and got fat. That's the method.
Right. No, exactly. I think like, and like, yeah, I think Raging Bull completely shifted the discourse in that one and like made it such a more physical acting like style or
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite acting scenes comes when he is interacting with a Secret Service agent.
yes.
Any thoughts on funny Travis?
Oh my gosh. Funny Travis is my favorite Travis. Like I sometimes
Well,
I like
it's
I
a low
watch
bar.
true. I think like I like watched the first half of the movie, and like I always start out the movie like, oh, like I find this is okay. I find Robert De Niro in this film like so attractive. And then I start the film and I watch like the first half and I'm like, I can't remember. I'm like, why did I think that? But then this scene comes up and I'm like, yes. When he says, like Henry Crinkle, that kills me. And then when he says Hopper Avenue, just like the pure, like you can see him just like stifling this immense like joy that like he's like pulling one over on like the Secret Service guy, like that. I don't know, that scene just like cracks me up.
And and this is another like state official, Palatine or otherwise, who is basically just like paying lip service to someone to just like move it along, or to track him and to tail him. And so he doesn't have a lot of positive interactions with the state.
No, he really doesn't.
Which probably and has been read by many people as a discussion of people coming back from the Vietnam War and how they fit in society, which is something that we really haven't brought up that much, but a quick note on it.
No, for sure.
We then get a little known scene where we find out whether or not people are talking to him.
Oh yes.
So this is one of those like we were saying with like Soylent Green and some other ones, like where you see the movie before you've seen the movie. Like everyone knows that, even if they haven't seen it. How does it work for you? Does it live up to the hype around it?
I think it does. It's such a great scene, and I mean, I don't know, like I don't really remember what I knew about the scene beforehand, but I think I assumed there would be like another person in it.
Well,
there isn't, or there is. But I think that like I think that's what's so cool about the scene is that we start on the one mirror image and then we like kind of flip to like the actual Travis, and just like the interplay between like fake Travis and like real Travis, and like Travis's reflection of himself, and just like the film is so much about like him trying to construct like a selfhood that's like appropriate for this world he's living in. And I think this scene, we see him like literally like watching himself and like trying to construct that, and I think it's such an interesting scene for that reason.
Yeah, it's one of those sometimes you see movies and you're like, or classic scenes and you're like, what were they talking about?
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
This is why it's in every like Oscar reel through the history of time. One of the trickier scenes to place, but probably one that's like, well, one that is relevant for a lot of people who write about the movie, is then the stick 'em up at the bodega. Thoughts on what's happening there, or how what you take away from it?
Yeah, I have multiple thoughts that I'm not quite sure how to make sense of, so I'll just lay some out, and I would be very interested to hear what you think as well, because the scene is like, I don't know, it's jam-packed like many of the scenes. But I mean, throughout the film we've been seeing like this growing like racial paranoia, and he's very hyper aware of like how people of color are perceiving him. We've had like at this point multiple shots of like Black people passing him on the street, and like these elongated shots, so like we know at this point that like he's like harboring some intense like racist feelings, and then I think those just like explode at the fact that like the second this guy turns around, like he's already dead, like Travis has like shot him. So I think that scene is just like these mounting like, yeah, I guess just like paranoia and like insecurity about his own like masculinity and sexuality are just like exploding at this point, and like the fact that they're exploding with the gun that like he bought in order to buy into like this new model of masculinity is really important. But then I also get confused about the role of the guy who's like working there. I'm not quite sure like how to read him. I mean, because he's obviously Latino. He like greets Travis in Spanish, and I think he appears to be Latino. So I don't know like what the racial dynamic is there, because then like he's the one who like really like brutally beats the guy on the ground. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It is. I mean, they're roughly around what yours are, and for me, it's going back and reading about Bernie Getz, and like thinking about the narratives that surrounded his his crimes, and these moments of vendetta, well, and obviously are still happening today, but these racialized vendettas and vigilantism, and how, for me, I was thinking like how it happens, but then I was just putting it to today, where you then have the further desecration of people beating up victims and just allowing that space that's been opened up by violence
Yeah.
to be a space that is filled with other violence. And so, in thinking when you have, let's say, racialized violence by a white police officer on a Black citizen, and then people come to that body in that moment and then hurl on it a lot of their own
Yeah.
angst and fragility and violence that is from a different form. But that's what I just kind of like sieved it through
Yeah.
today rather than try and read it in the film.
Yeah.
But it's a scene that I've probably seen Taxi Driver not a huge amount of times. I would say probably 4 times now, which is, there are people who've seen a bajillion in one, and it's a scene that I forget about like each time, and
Yeah.
again this time I'm like, oh yeah, like it doesn't stay with me. I think because it is edited in, it's kind of in a corner as acts are changing, and in some ways it should be a bigger deal than it is.
No, that's like so true. And I hadn't really thought of it that way till you said that. But I do think it took me until like the third or fourth time of like watching it to actually remember like that was coming up, which it seems like it should be like a climax. But yeah, it is like it's easy to forget about, which is weird. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And after it, we see the cracks really emerging with the letters to parents. Are you digging that happy anniversary to a few good scouts card?
I love that card.
I love that card. It's a great card. And he's lying to his parents about his governmental work and Betsy. And I think this is when some of the mental illness becomes a little more direct out of diagnostic manuals. And pushing the television to the brink, and then ultimately we get an "I love you." He pushes it over, and we then meet Irene and Matthew, not Scout. What's his name?
Sport.
I have the good Scout.
Good guy, yeah.
Matthew / Sport, and. Before getting into this, I did do the math real quick. So $25 for 30 minutes in 1976 would be $115 nowadays, just for people who are wondering. And we see a tone shift once he gets Iris in the hotel room. How does that work with the masculinity features and facets that we've seen so far in the film?
Yeah, it is interesting because I feel like to an extent, besides maybe in like his letters and things, I think with Iris, he's able to be the least like constructed, I guess, version of himself. And I do feel like he's a little more like real with her. I mean, like for one thing, he's not performing like this super hyper masculinity because if he was, he would not be resisting like her advances. But he also takes on like this like more like fatherly role, which is interesting because it's the first time we've seen anything like that come out in him. Yeah, I don't know, his relationship with Iris is just, it's interesting, and like it's interesting at the breakfast too because I feel like he's able to be a little more honest than he is with like most people, and they connect in a really weird way. I don't know. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he's allowed to be condescending and like have power back in the relationship.
Yeah.
Like, she's a minor, and like it has various forms of insecurity, including shelter and a lack of familial structure.
Yeah.
And so the way Betsy has various forms of capital that he can't like condescend or talk down to her, like he's able to hit that zone of masculinity where it's like I'm in control, and he feels comfortable in that space. And so that's but it's not, I mean, there's a lot more at work, and that's super simplistic, but that was how I like quickly like boiled it down, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And like I think, yeah, a lot of why he likes her is like, okay, so Betsy turns out to be like part of, like, he says like they're all a union, all the women are a union, so like Betsy's like too far gone. Like she seemed like this ideal woman, but like now he's just like going to try, yeah, and like you said, find like the most like fragile and like weak, but also like as he sees it, like untainted by this like scummy New York City. Yeah, I don't know, it's interesting.
And she's not part of a union.
Yeah, she's not.
I mean, she is she's unmoored from like a job, from coworkers, from family, things that Betsy has that give her power. Like she doesn't have those, and so like by being out of a cultural union or a societal union, he fits she fits his like platonic ideal for a woman, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't speak back to me. But favorite pair of sunglasses Iris wears?
Yeah, she wears quite a few.
Like 2 in that scene.
Yeah, I know. I don't remember which one is my favorite. I think I just like the fact that she, in the middle of like breakfast, takes off her sunglasses and like still within that same meal is putting on a different pair. I think is a power move, but yeah.
Yeah, and the sun hat, you on board with that?
I am. Yeah, anything she's doing, I'm into it, I think.
Okay. Okay, and then the scene between Iris and Sport where they're dancing to the actual like theme song.
Yeah.
Like the non-diegetic music becomes diegetic, right? And this is a moment to talk about like Harvey Keitel potentially, like his acting. Is it of the same world as De Niro's? Is he doing the same things, or does it pick up the same way for you?
I don't know. I mean, like Keitel's also kind of like associated with the method, and he was working at the studio as well. So like he's definitely like being talked about in some of those same like discourses more broadly outside of this film. But yeah, I don't know necessarily how to read. I don't know. I guess I haven't given it a ton of thought in terms of like how his acting reads for me in this film. He's certainly creepy and like disturbing, and just I don't know like how he's like forming his words, but like he speaks in like this weird like cooing noise almost, and like ooh, it creeps me out. So he's certainly like doing his job in terms of like creeping out the viewer, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has it's a like he doesn't, he will, you know, say that Travis isn't hip, but he doesn't feel hip.
He does not feel hip.
But we then get preparations as Travis prepares to assassinate a politician, something that seems like would be pretty verboten in a film nowadays. But we do catch it here. We get a gun range. We get shoe polish on fire. This is where your flowers are burning. Sharpening a knife. So these seem to be some physical manifestations of masculinity. How did any pop out for you?
I mean, I don't know if this is too early, if this is I mean, because we don't see it till he's actually at the rally, but would this be around the time he's like shaving?
Yeah. The motor, yeah. Well, it would be, and then we catch it at the rally. With the reveal.
Yeah, so like I think that one in particular is like so clearly like some sort of image that he's modeling himself out, like after, and I think it's like we've seen him sort of gradually like shifting and transforming throughout the film, but like this is like the first time he like really like physically is like manifesting that like so distinctly and like marking this new like self that he's created. So I think all that together just kind of works really well. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it is, it's a dress up, a Halloween dress up.
It
Like,
is, yeah.
particularly between the boots and the mother of pearl shirt and the belt and the mohawk. It's just he's doing his best to play someone, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Um, we have an unsuccessful assassination attempt. I like the way he runs away from that crowd.
Yeah, man, he bolts.
Sort of scramble.
He is.
And then a very bonkers, a stylized shootout. What interests you most from that scene?
Wait, is this the final shootout?
Yeah, the final shootout.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like for one thing, I don't know if this is true. Like I heard that they kind of like toned down the saturation because like they needed to get an R rating and otherwise it would have been like unrated. Have you like heard that?
I know that they fought, like Columbia and Scorsese fought to make sure it wasn't rated X. I don't know if this is. I don't know if that was one of the concessions. I know that some of the violence, but I mean this is the most violent scene, so it probably was this. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think I heard that, but yeah, that's why like the color is kind of like toned down and like muted. Was in order to like get that R rating. But yeah, I mean, this scene is, I think it had, like, I understand why they really, like, fought so hard for this scene. And, like, because I do think we've seen just, like, this violence brewing throughout the whole time. And, like, that it, like, necessarily warrants just, like, a total explosion. Like, we've seen, like, De Niro's performance just, like, being, like, suppressing some sort of, like, violent rage. And then, like, that is just, like, super, is just manifest throughout this final like violent shootout. Yeah, now I'm all I'm seeing in my head is like the guy whose like fingers get blown off. That's quite disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah, disturbing's the word for it. And again, this is one of those, if you're going to say that white dudes having like straight white dudes in particular, like making commentary on the illogical ends of masculinity.
Yeah.
Like it could go to various other ends to satire or critique it, but the fact it goes to a super bloody shootout.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it is the like it does fit within what they're trying to accomplish, and it does certainly register. But yeah, it's one of those, again, like a day of the week
Yeah.
side of the bed I wake up on.
100%. Yeah.
So then after the battle with the gangsters, we get the letters from the Steam Smuzz, which is a great like Paul Schrader using that like Dutch Reformed can of or phone book page. But we get an epilogue where, like I said, Mr. Iris's parents thank him, and and then Betsy gets in his back seat, and away they go. And a lot of people debate the question: is this epilogue a dream sequence, or how it fits within the movie? Like, do you have a particular take on that general question, or even like the merits of the question?
Yeah, no, I think that second part, like, I don't know. I guess like my reading has probably been like more towards it's like a fantasy like dream dying sequence versus like actual reality. I mean, I think it just seems too extreme. And like if we're like talking about like this film being like masculinity and like white masculinity in particular being like pushed to the breaking point and like just being like totally rejected from society, I don't think then that he would be like welcomed back into society that easily. And that like I think the whole point is that this is an inappropriate expression of like white masculinity and like that violence is like it's just like an unwarranted and I don't think then that the society would be like rewarding him and I don't think the point I think is that like he doesn't achieve this like ideal he set up for himself, which I think is embodied through Betsy. So I think the fact that in the end of this little sequence he's like above her and is able to kind of like reject her, I don't think that that's reality. I do think that's like his dream and fantasy. But yeah, then the second part of your question is interesting. Like, what are even the merits of asking that question? Like, I don't know necessarily that it matters. I think either way you can still be kind of like getting the same thing out of it because like I think on the flip side, if you read it kind of as like a satirical, like really extreme ending, I think you can still extract like some of the same themes from it. So like I don't know how much it matters, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. I can see either reading, I think.
Well, speaking of fantasies, how about this? Let's recast Taxi Driver in 2020. Okay.
Yes. Let's.
Who do
Okay.
you have playing Travis Bickle?
Okay, yeah. So I thank you for telling me in advance about this question because I really did have to really think about how I would cast this. So
Yeah.
I did some. We have some gender bending. So we'll see. So I don't know how this would. It would very much change the meaning of the entire film, but we're just gonna like go with it. It's more like oh, it would be cool to see this person do it. I like Florence Pugh a lot, and I would like her to be Travis Bickle. I loved her, and I don't know if you say Midsummer or Midsommar. I don't really know how it's supposed to be pronounced.
It's one of those. If I say Midsummer, I feel like I'm like trying to be like too in. And so
Okay, that's kind of like my feel. Sometimes I just like mumble it and hope that no one will like catch what I'm saying. Regardless, Florence from Midsommar. I think she should just be in more movies. I think she's such a great actor, and I would love to see her take on like a really like wild out there role. So this is the role for her.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my pitch.
So then who is the Betsy?
So then Betsy is just another actor who I really love and I think should be in more films. And so this is Lupita Nyong'o. I want to play Betsy. I don't know what that would mean for the whole story, but I think that could be very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Albert Brooks's character Tom?
Okay, yeah. So this one, like, it came to me right away. Do you watch SNL?
Yeah.
Okay, Beck Bennett.
Oh yeah.
I just love him, and he's like the perfect like straight man. Like in terms of a comedy, so I felt like he would thrive in that role. Yeah.
Okay. And then for Senator Palantine?
Okay, that one I could not cast. I could not. I would like to hear who you would cast because I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you kind of you need someone who is a bit of a, like I said, cipher. Like if you do Clint Eastwood, people read it one way. If you do a famously liberal politician, like it goes the other. I think maybe you go, maybe you just make it direct. Maybe that's the route. Like have like you make it a clear politician. Like you don't cast that. Like have it be Jerry Brown.
Yeah.
That young up-and-comer Jerry Brown.
That would be certainly interesting.
Yeah, or just have it be the Warren campaign and be like, yeah, this is what it's about. Okay, sport, Matthew.
Yeah, Okay. I decided on Bradley Cooper. So here are my thoughts there. So generally I find Harvey Keitel like wildly attractive, but then in this film, like I'm just extremely repulsed by him. And the same goes for Bradley Cooper. Like I have been obsessed. I've actually written him a fan letter in high school. So I'm actually
Aw,
obsessed with him. Yeah, he
a
didn't write
physical
back.
letter?
A physical letter. I sent it in the mail and he did not write back. Um,
Not a good scout.
not a good scout. So I think I would cast him because I think you need someone who like generally is not repulsive and then in the role wears like a long black wig.
Mhm. Wizard?
I was happy with this choice. I've chosen actually Robert De Niro. I think that would be interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a grasshopper.
exactly.
And then lastly, I don't think she had a billing, but the woman at the concession stand who's not taking any guff. I like her.
Um, okay, I just like kind of I couldn't really think of this one either. I said like Dan Levy. I just like him, and I think he could be a funny dude in really any role, and just like a little cameo like that, I think would add a lot of color to the film. But
Okay.
yeah.
That is.
So that rounds out Taxi Driver 2020.
I don't know what the hell that movie is.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what it would be saying.
Yeah, well, and I think that like your experiment was fun. Like when you just mess a little bit with race and gender, you see how like this film really like the other truths that it might have. Like they can they'll get a like it's not universalizing boo. It's not it's so wound up in those things that
Yeah,
you can expose or not expose it, but like how does it transfer? But
yeah.
I would go see it.
Okay, good.
Okay, lastly, Eileen,
Oh
were you
boy.
aware that Proust had a younger sister named Becky?
I was not.
Well,
Now
he did.
I am.
And she developed a 5-question questionnaire to determine whether or not you love movies. It is scientifically valid. Do you care to take it?
I do, and I
Good.
will.
Then I'll put on social science specs. First question. What was your first R-rated movie?
Yeah. Okay, so I like have had a trouble trying to remember. The first one I remember vividly was Paranormal Activity 4.
Oh God.
Which takes place like on like a webcam for half of it. So I had to make sure that there was not a door behind me because I'm still like paranoid that um whoever I forget the woman's name, whoever the murderer is, but would come out and get me. So
So it burned you too. Like
hmm
not only your first, but yeah, it set some scars, huh?
yes, for sure.
Okay, the movie you would be compelled to buy, even though you may already own a copy, if you found it at Pickers Paradise for $2.
Yeah. Um this was another one I had a lot of trouble thinking of. Um I think I will settle with Stop Making Sense. I want a film that I would watch multiple times to get my full $2 worth. And that is one I have watched multiple times, and that I think it is an enjoyable film to share with others. And I would feel very cool whipping out my DVD copy of Stop Making Sense. So I think that's mine.
Mhm. You mentioned SNL before. Did you watch his performance on
Okay,
recently?
actually, I did not. I missed it.
Oh, it's worth it. Go check it out.
I will.
Okay, best movie to watch on a second date.
Yeah, I think I've decided on Anchorman 2. I think it's The Legend Continues is the little subtitle there.
Mm.
Um, thought process there is that I find that movie very funny and I I think it's just so ridiculous. I love the little subplot it takes where Ron Burgundy is like blind for like a half hour and it just does not fit in the film at all. So I think I would need to watch this film to make sure we share some similar humor, and if you don't enjoy that, I don't know if we'll continue our relationship.
Got it. Sub question to this one: what is your favorite pizza toppings?
Okay. That's tough. I've had a long journey with pizza tolerances and like likings. I really hated pizza. It might have just been like me trying to be like a contrarian and like not like pizza because everyone liked pizza. So I didn't like pizza for a long time. And then in like I'm gonna estimate sixth grade I did through like 10th grade. But then now I don't really love pizza. But I think if I were to have a pizza, I think I would probably want mushrooms and I like sausage. So we'll say mushrooms and sausage.
Okay. So, what is the best movie, or what is the best movie to watch while you're eating a sausage and mushroom pizza on the couch?
I'm gonna say like Bridesmaids. No real explanation there.
No, got it. And then lastly, you are 10 years old and receive a screener from the future. What film most blows your mind?
Yeah, that was a tough one as well. I was trying to be like super clever with it because I've heard some people's responses and I thought they were like very clever. Um, but I couldn't think of a clever one. So I'm going to go with Inception because I think that came out when I was 11 and it blew my mind. So if it blew my mind when I was 11, it most certainly would have blown my mind when I was 10.
Good. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Hey, 1 second. Let me do the calculation. Add this, do that, carry the one. Hey, turns out you love movies.
Yay!
Yay! And we loved having you here on Zoom back camera. And we loved having you at Notre Dame and in DPAC and FTT. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a great evening and we will see you soon.
All right. Thank you, Ricky.
Okay. Good night, everyone.